I believe that if the Papal States united Italy, then Austria would get to keep Lombardy-Veneto, which is quite important. This means that Austria is unlikely to lose the Brothers' War of 1866, as in our timeline, Italy joined so they can get these lands. As a result, if Prussia loses against Austria, then the Franco-Prussian War would not happen. So Napoleon III would remain in charge of France, and Germany will never form. When it comes to the Apennine Peninsula, having the Papal States unite all of Italy would also change quite a lot. For example, I don't see the Papal States to invade the Ottoman Empire over Libya in 1911, which would most likely prevent the two Balkan Wars. But most importantly, the Papal States I don't think would participate in the scramble of Africa in 1885. Let me tell you how the Papal States could have united Italy and how this would affect the Victorian era, but also the First World War. There are a few options for the Papal States to unite the Italians on the Apennine Peninsula. Historically, it was Sardinia-Piedmont with the help of France that were able to form Italy and win in a war against Austria. This time it will be very much different, but it's obvious that the Papal States would need help from a major power, which can be either France or Austria. One of these major powers can help the Papal States to unify Italy militarily, which is the simplest answer, but also it's a bit unlikely. One of the many options is for both Austria and France to see the Papal States as a buffer state between the two, making sure that no power expands their influence on the Apennine Peninsula. As a result, it's completely possible for France to take Sardinia-Piedmont and give their lands to the Pope, while also annexing Savoy and Nice themselves. Austria can also help with the minor states of Modena, Lucca, Parma, but also Tuscany. The Austrians can benefit from this move, as this would allow them to keep Lombardy-Veneto, which includes the major Italian cities of Venice and Milan. As for the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, it's completely possible for Garibaldi's expedition to still achieve success and overthrow the monarchy in the country, allowing the Pope to annex it. This is one way for the Papal States to form Italy, but it's a bit unrealistic, I will admit. So I'll give you another take on how this could happen. I think it's completely possible for the Pope to play his cards right in the 1848 revolutions and in the First Italian War of Unification. During the 1848 revolutions, most of Italy was in flames, as there were rebellions in the Apennine Peninsula, with the goal to create a unified Italian nation, but also kick Austria out of Lombardy-Veneto. The ruler of the Papal States at the time was Pope Pius IX, which is important to remember, as he ruled the country and the Catholic Church for 32 years, which is the second longest in the history of the Papal States. When he came to power in 1846, he had the ambitions to reform and modernize the Papal States. But this never happened, as the 1848 revolutions that spread throughout Europe had changed his plans. In fact, the Papal States had it particularly difficult, as they were briefly replaced by the Roman Republic. It happened because the people of the Papal States were demanding a democratic government and social reforms, but also for the country to declare war on Austria and help the self-proclaimed republics of San Marco, which is Venice, and the provisional government of Milan. At the time, Sardinia-Piedmont was also at war with Austria, so the Italian states were pretty unified in their goal to kick Austria out of Lombardy-Veneto. The Roman Republic, however, was very short-lived, as France invaded them, with the goal to restore the Pope. This was very important, as Napoleon III just became the president, and he had enjoyed a lot of support from the French Catholics, who in turn demanded the restoration of the Papal States. France also saw an opportunity to increase their presence on the Apennine Peninsula and push away the Habsburgs. This is the key for this scenario to succeed, as at the time Austria was dealing not only with the Italian rebels, but also with the Poles, Slovaks and most importantly the Hungarians, who deserve their own video. But the rise of the Roman Republic could have been prevented, as when the 1848 revolution started, the Pope fled the Papal States. This could have pretty much not happened, so I would suggest that the Pope doesn't leave Rome but works with the protesters. In fact, before the 1848 revolutions, admirers of Pope Pius IX wanted him to lead the battle of Italian independence, so what if he did? Historically, the Pope did send 10,000 troops to help Sardinia-Piedmont in their war against Austria, but it was not enough, so the Pope decided to withdraw his troops. Speaking of Sardinia-Piedmont, King Charles Albert aspired to unite Italy with the endorsement of Pope Pius IX, so the two could have worked together. This is an important part of the puzzle, as earlier I mentioned that France intervened against the Italian rebels, helping Austria, but what if this wasn't the case? What if the Pope did not betray his people by escaping the country, but accepted the people's call to start a war against Austria? When Sardinia-Piedmont declared war on Austria, pretty much all the countries on the Apennine Peninsula sent help, wishing to liberate Lombardy-Veneto. The Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, led by Ferdinand II, sent 16,050 men to fight against Austria, but later recalled these soldiers, as King Charles Albert of Sardinia-Piedmont did not refuse the crown of Sicily, so Ferdinand II recalled his soldiers in a sign of protest. Historically, a lot of these soldiers refused to go back and fought for the greater good of the Italian people. The First Italian War of Unification ultimately failed, as the Italian states were not prepared enough to take Austria, but I want to change that. In this alternate history, Pope Pius IX calls for the Apennine Peninsula to be united under the Catholic faith. Later, he would join the invasion of Austria, initiated by Sardinia-Piedmont, which means that the Roman Republic never rises to power. Still, I expect Ferdinand II to pull out his army as a result of the actions of King Charles Albert. But due to the Pope being involved in the war, a larger percentage of the army of Ferdinand II would remain in Austria. Historically, Sardinia-Piedmont was doing quite well, as they reached Milan and fortified their positions, but also Venice was their own state, that was besieged for a year. To summarize, it was not looking too good for Austria. They were being pushed back and the two major Italian cities of Milan and Venice were under the control of Italian rebels. This time, we would have the Pope send his entire army, rather than a small task force of 10,000 soldiers, but also more soldiers who choose to remain on the front lines, as more from the Kingdom of Two Sicilies would listen to the Pope rather than to their monarch of Ferdinand II. We can expect that Milan and Venice would be linked up by the Italian coalition, making the Austrians retreat back to the Alps. It is there I want to mention the Italian constitution, which I was surprised to learn was written on the 11th of February 1848. It came with Leopold II, the Grand Duke of Tuscany, accepting the constitution, which later followed in Sardinia-Piedmont and the Papal States. When Sardinia-Piedmont united all of Italy, this exact constitution remained up until 1948, when Italy became a republic. This is important, as if the Papal States were to unite all of Italy, they need to be the initiators of the constitution, making sure that the Pope is the head of state and directly controls all Catholic churches and monuments, while also having a small personal army. As for how Italy would look like under the Pope, the country would transform into a confederation, where the rulers of its member countries would continue to rule, but be united in terms of foreign policy and army. You can think of this as the Holy Roman Empire, which was decentralized, and although it acted as a single country on the macro, on the micro, several member countries were fighting each other. This I think is the most likely option for the Papal States to unite Italy, which is through a common constitution that was historically accepted by Sardinia-Piedmont and Tuscany. This time I am suggesting that the Pope initiates it, and also it gets accepted by the same states. The country would be called the Catholic Italian Confederation, and I want to stress the word Catholic, which is in front of Italian. This wording would be deliberate, as the Pope would want the country to be more united by Catholicism rather than the Italian identity, hence why the country will not be called the Italian Catholic Confederation. With this union of countries, we can expect the coalition to beat Austria, as the Austrians were busy elsewhere. France can also join by using the same justification on why they invaded the Roman Republic in our timeline, which was to appease the French Catholics and help out the Pope. If the French were to do that, which I think is fairly likely, with Napoleon III becoming the president and wanting to help out the Pope, further gaining the support of his people, but also win an easy war. I don't think that there is a way for France to go against the Pope, for the reason that the French Catholics voted in majority for Napoleon III to become president. Considering that France invaded the Roman Republic so they can restore the Pope, I think it becomes very likely for France to join the war of Italian struggle. France taking Nice and Savoy is possible, but quite unlikely I would say. This is because at the height of 1848 and 1849, the Italian unity and identity was at an all-time high. I don't see a possibility which they give up ethnic Italian lands to a foreign power. As a reminder, pretty much all of the Apennine Peninsula united against Austria and wanted to kick them out. France attacking the Pope is not possible either, so the only possibility is for France to help out the Pope to unite Italy, while gaining favors. Napoleon III can use this as a victory and proclaim himself as the Emperor of France, with the blessing of the Pope. Napoleon III would also enjoy a lot of support, as he had helped out the Pope, securing the blessing of the French Catholics, but also Napoleon III would win his first war. So the French would inevitably join the war I think, but even if they don't, the Catholic Italian Confederation still has a good chance of defeating Austria on their own, which they almost did historically. In any case, Lombardy-Veneto would be liberated and join the Catholic Italian Confederation. There is also a possibility that the Italians keep going and take Trentino and the Eastern Peninsula, but this is quite unlikely. This is because there was practically no Italian justification for these territories at the time, as their main goal was only focused on Lombardy-Veneto. In the peace deal with Austria, they would get this territory after the end of the war. The Confederation could have kept going and captured more land, but they had just formed a new union and needed to consolidate power, rather than to expand it. Since this country is more Catholic than Italian, it gives the Pope more power to expand into any Catholic country under the basis of protecting Catholicism and famous monuments and churches. By the dawn of 1849, the Papal States would have united all the Apennine Peninsula through war and diplomacy. Still, these countries would be technically independent and separate, as they would have their own currencies and monarchs. For example, this is a very rare coin I have from Lucca, made in 1837. The monarch on the back is Charles II, and if you play Victoria III, which starts in 1836, you will recognize him, as he is the starting monarch of the country. Pretty cool that I have a physical coin from this time period. The coin is 2 lire and 10 grams of 66% silver, but also there were 153,000 of these coins ever produced, so they were quite rare. Now, back to the video. Something cool that could happen is the Catholic Italian Confederation would join the Crimean War against Russia, for the same reason that Sardinia-Piedmont did historically, which is a minor detail. Going over to 1866, Austria and Prussia would have a war and the winner would dominate the smaller German kingdoms. Historically, this war was won by Prussia, who formed Germany 5 years later, but this time it would be different. The Austrians looked like they had the advantage over Prussia, but was because Italy joined the war, with the goal to conquer Venice. Now I would say that the Catholic Italian Confederation will not join this war, so it's going to be a fair fight between Austria and Prussia, including the smaller German states. I even think it's very possible for the Papal States to send help to Austria, as if Prussia were to win, the Protestant Prussians would conquer the Catholic Bavarians and other Catholic South German states. If the Pope and France decide to help Austria out, then there is no way for Prussia to win. In a case of a Prussian defeat, I can see the western part of the country being broken off and being called Catholic Westphalia, emphasizing the Catholic identity. In reality, only the western part of the country was majority Catholic, as I'm using this map. There is also a possibility for a Catholic Polish state to be formed, but I don't think that Austria would be so enthusiastic about this, considering their Polish minority. Silesia, which was predominantly Catholic, would remain in Prussia, with the goal to make sure that there is always going to be a religious imbalance in Prussia, making the country weaker and more indecisive. With an Austrian victory in the war, the country never reforms into Austria-Hungary, so screw the Hungarians, I guess. Prussia is also drastically weaker, and they do not border France, so there is no way in hell that the Franco-Prussian War still starts. Spain can try to put a Hohenzollern on the throne, but if France were to oppose it, there is going to be a compromise. Since Spain was and still is a deeply Catholic nation, it's entirely possible for an Italian nobleman to become the ruler of Spain, as the people would accept him most likely. Spain and Italy would be united under the Catholic faith, with Spain becoming known as Catholic Spain, using this cool flag depicting the heart of Jesus Christ and a Christian cross. Historically it was used by the Carlists, but I think it's a nice fit. Going over to Prussia, due to their embarrassing defeat, they would be forced to ally with Russia, due to their shared goal to partition Austria. In this timeline, as Germany is never formed, the First World War would look drastically different, as Austria defeated the country that was supposed to protect them later. Going over to the scramble of Africa, where I don't think that the Pope, and by extension the Catholic Italian Confederation, would take any land. On the contrary, they might just do that, with the goal to convert Libya and other colonies to Catholicism, spreading the Catholic faith. In any case, just to be sure, I will give Libya to Spain, which was an ally of the Pope and the Italian people. As for Somalia and Eritrea, they will go to Britain, and later you will see why. As the 20th century would unfold, there is a key event missing, which is the Italo-Turkish War of 1911-1912. This war was won and initiated by the Italians over Libya and the Dodecanese Islands. It's very important as nearing its end, the Balkan states gained confidence and also declared war on the Ottoman Empire, expanding their influence greatly. I cannot tell you if the Pope is going to initiate this war or not, but if I don't cause this war, then the two Balkan wars don't happen. Most likely the First World War is greatly altered. This is the point in the scenario where I will make the video a lot unrealistic, as making any accurate predictions from here now is impossible, but we can have a really fun and interesting scenario. The Pope is famous for calling crusades and reclaiming the Holy Land, so what if we do exactly that instead of starting a war over Libya? I already mentioned that Britain would gain what used to be Italian East Africa, and in exchange they would help out against the Ottoman Empire. Since the Pope is calling for a crusade, I think it's entirely possible for France, Austria and even Russia to decide to join. The Ottoman Empire would simply be screwed over and lose half of their land and influence. Iraq would go to Britain, together with Kuwait. France would take Syria and Lebanon, as they did historically, with the Pope getting the Holy Land. The rest of the Arabian Peninsula I cannot tell you who gets it, but it's most likely Britain. As for the European parts of the Ottoman Empire, Russia would get Ottoman Armenia, but the Balkans would be especially tricky. Serbia would be mainly supported by Austria, as the Serbians were pretty much an economic satellite of the Habsburgs at the time, while Bulgaria would be supported by Russia. The question of Macedonia would have the potential to start a world war, as the Russians would want to give all of it to Bulgaria, expanding the Russian influence in the Balkans, with the Austrians wanting Serbia to get all of Macedonia, expanding the Austrian influence. In the end, the Pope would split it in half, which totally would not start a massive conflict in the Balkans, if not the world. As for the rest of the Balkans, Albania would get formed, but they would soon drift to the Italian and Austrian spheres of influence. Since the goal of the war was a crusade against the Ottoman Empire, Greece expanding into Asia Minor and the Anatolian coast is possible. The Greeks getting Constantinople is a possibility, as at the time the city was almost exactly 50-50 split between Christians and Muslims. This would leave us with these borders in 1910, and with the Macedonian question still not being fully resolved, a war between Austria and Russia is a possibility, and by extension the Balkan countries. If this were to happen, then the involvement of France and Britain is not guaranteed, so this may not cause a world war, just an European one. As for France, they are still the Second French Empire, being led by Napoleon IV, who this time will not die in the Zulu Kingdom at the age of 23. It is possible for the Pope to send help to Austria, as going to war against a Catholic country would be unacceptable. There is also the case for Poland, as if Orthodox Russia wins and captures Galicia, they would suppress the Catholic Poles in the region. I think that there is only one option for the Pope and the Catholic Italian Confederation, and this would be to join Austria's war. The longer the video goes, the more unrealistic it gets, as we are already 70 years into the future, and some key wars did not happen or were lost by Prussia. This in turn makes the world very unrecognizable and different. The balance of power in Europe is completely altered with the absence of Germany. In any case, I want to finish this war that I started, so I would have the Pope join the war against Russia and Prussia, and calling Catholic Westphalia into the conflict, which would bring all the Catholic German states into the war by extension. France can also join either side, but them joining the Pope is a more likely option. Why? Well, this is because Spain is also an ally of the Pope, so they can symbolically join this war too. If France were to join, the Prussian and the Russian side, they would have a front line against the Catholic Germans, the Italians and the Spanish, so France would be at war on 3 fronts, something I don't see them doing. As a result, it's likely for the French to remain neutral or join the Pope, maybe in return for some concessions on the Rhineland. When Prussia and Russia are defeated, I'd say it's more likely for the Catholic Germans to unite into one state, which would be closely affiliated with Austria and the Pope. In the peace treaty, the Austrians would annex the Polish majority regions of Russia and Prussia, forming a Catholic Poland as a client state. Ukraine becoming independent is also possible, but it's dependent on how badly the Prussians and the Russians lose. Considering that the war started over Macedonia, I will make the executive decision to secure an everlasting peace in the Balkans by making all of Macedonia a lake. Jokes aside, check this video out about what if Bulgaria managed to win the Second Balkan War. I hope you like this one and I hope to see you there.